After turning 25, Duyen no longer found herself invincible in the world of blind dates. In the past, it was always her rejecting others, but now, the tables had turned. 2 men in a row thought she was too old. If these men had been 21 or 22, Duyen would have said nothing. But one was 26 and the other 29. Where did they get the confidence to criticize someone else's age? Duyen was furious and decided to withdraw from the blind date scene. By the time she was 28, she still hadn't found a husband. Her mother, Dumu, was as anxious as a spinning top. She accepted every introduction that came her way, regardless of the circumstances. Duyen found excuses to decline several, but this one was impossible to avoid. Zhuishuiliu, 29 years old, an overseas returnee, and the general manager of JK. Duyen found the name familiar. When she saw his photo, he looked even more familiar. Wasn't this her first love? When they broke up, she had comforted him, saying, "Girls like me, who possess both beauty and brains, will never be short of boyfriends." But you're different. You're going to the US, a place you're unfamiliar with, and you don't like foreign girls. You'll most likely end up single. Let's part ways amicably. We can still be friends, right? Going on a blind date with a first love, was it romantic or sacrilegious? It was embarrassing. She could almost imagine Zhuishuiliu's gloating tone. A beauty with brains who couldn't get married at 28, huh? Mom, this guy is too handsome. I don't feel safe. I might take him out but never bring him back. Duyen made one last attempt to resist before leaving the house. Dumu gave her a sideways glance. Do you think this is, if you are the one? You're going to reject someone for being too handsome or too ugly. If you have the skills, why don't you learn to paint like Ma Liang and create one yourself? I promise I won't say a word. Blatant sarcasm. Duyen mentally shook her fist and shouted, this woman must not be her real mother. Duyen was practically dragged to the restaurant by Dumu. After not seeing him for many years, Zhuishuiliu had shed his youthful immaturity and arrogance. Now, dressed in a sharp suit, he sat there looking handsome and poised, a promising young man. The introducer was Aunt Shin, a card-playing friend of Dumu's and Zhuishuiliu's aunt's classmate. She enthusiastically said, "Jichin, this is Miss Duyen." Miss Duyen is not only beautiful, but she's also a graduate of a prestigious university with a master's degree. She truly possesses both beauty and brains. The corners of Zhuishuiliu's mouth lifted slightly. Duyen forced a smile at Aunt Shun and said, "You flatter me, Auntie. Look at that, how humble she is." Zhuishuiliu smiled faintly and extended his hand towards Duyen. "Miss Du, I've heard a lot about you." Likewise. Duyen beamed like a flower, extending her small hand to shake his finger a couple of times. Under the table, Dumu kicked her and whispered a warning. Act reserved. The 4 of them chatted idly for a while, and then Aunt Shin suggested to Dumu, "We old folks are here, but the young people can't open up. Why don't we retreat?" Dumu quickly agreed. "Yes, that's right. Didn't so-and-so invite us to play cards?" A lame excuse. Duyen couldn't even muster the energy to roll her eyes. As soon as they left, the atmosphere grew cold. Duyen quietly sipped her coffee, and Zhuishuiliu also quietly sipped his. What should have been a poignant reunion of old lovers ended up as a dull encounter at a blind date table, drinking bitter coffee in silence. Drinking too much coffee had its consequences. "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom," Duyen said with a gentle smile. In the restroom, Duyen discovered something even worse. Her period had arrived early, and she didn't have any sanitary pads with her. She called Dumu for help, vividly describing the situation and adding, "You'd better hurry, or Jichin's impression of me will be ruined." After hanging up, she waited patiently. It would take at least half an hour for Dumu to arrive, but less than 10 minutes later, she heard a strange woman calling, "Duyen? Who's Duyen?" "Here, I'm Duyen. Who are you?" Duyen asked through the door. The woman replied, "Open the door. Your boyfriend asked me to bring you a sanitary pad." Duyen was stunned. Was she talking about Zhuishuiliu? She opened the door slightly, and the woman handed her a black plastic bag. She shyly said, "Thank you." When she opened the plastic bag, her nose tingled with emotion. Back when they were dating, she had forced Zhushuiliu to buy sanitary pads for her once, and it was this exact brand. She couldn't believe he still remembered after all these years. She hugged the sanitary pads and felt a bit sad. Then Dumu called, immediately asking, "Did Zhushuiliu bring you the sanitary pads?" Her temper flared, and she hissed in a low voice, "Who told you to ask him for help? Was that appropriate? It's so embarrassing." Dumu said, "I was just trying to help you to get closer." Whether or not this incident brought Du Yan and Zhushuiliu closer, she wasn't sure. What she did know was that after tidying up, she had snuck away without a word. She simply didn't have the face to continue facing Zhushuiliu. The next day, while having lunch in the company cafeteria, she told Su Man about what happened. Su Man said, "In my opinion, your first love probably still has feelings for you. Take my boyfriend, for example. We've been together for 5 years, and he still refuses to buy sanitary pads for me, let alone accompany me to pick them out. Your first love is quite the rare breed." Su Man's words stirred up Du Yan's already unsettled heart, and she spent the entire afternoon wondering if Zhushuiliu really did still have feelings for her. By the end of the workday, she hadn't figured it out, but instead, Zhushuiliu called her. "Do you have time to grab a cup of coffee?" Zhushuiliu got straight to the point. Du Yan felt she had to maintain some decorum. "Sorry, I have something going on tonight, so I'm not really free." Zhushuiliu said, "I'm downstairs at your office. You're about to get off work, right? If you don't want to have coffee, that's fine. Just pay me back for the sanitary pads." Caw caw caw. Du Yan could almost see a flock of crows flying over her head. At this moment, she was very certain that Zhushuiliu had absolutely no lingering feelings for her. In an instant, all those romantic notions flew out of her mind. As she walked out of the office building, she spotted Zhushuiliu from a distance, leaning against his white car. Du Yan walked over with a blank expression. "How much was it?" 13 yuan and 60 cents. 15 yuan. Keep the change." "That won't do. I never take advantage of women," Zhushuiliu said seriously, as he pulled out some change from his wallet and handed it to her. "Here, 1 yuan and 40 cents. Du Yan took the change angrily, and instead of putting it in her bag, she looked around. She saw a street performer across the square and walked over to drop the coins into his hat. Zhushuiliu followed her and asked, "Are you heading home?" "I'm going that way. I can give you a ride." Du Yan forced a smile. "Thanks, but no thanks. I never take advantage of men." She took the bus home, and as soon as she opened the door, she saw a man who looked suspiciously like Zhushuiliu sitting on her couch, his head down, seemingly engrossed in something. Hearing the noise, he turned his head and flashed her a smile. Du Yan's purse fell to the floor with a loud thud. "Why are you in my house?" "Your mom invited me for dinner." "Why would she invite you for dinner? Are you starving?" Zhushuiliu smiled again. "Maybe it's because I'm good-looking and make the food more appetizing." "Humph." Du Yan scoffed disdainfully. She walked around to face Zhushuiliu and saw that her most treasured photo album was spread out on the coffee table. All the blood in her body rushed to her face, as if she had been caught red-handed doing something shameful. "Who gave you permission to go through my stuff?" She snatched the album and hugged it to her chest, her face burning hot. Zhushuiliu's voice was soft and gentle. "I didn't expect you to still keep these photos. Don't get the wrong idea." Du Yan lifted her chin. "I just couldn't be bothered to throw them away." Du Mu, holding a spatula, rushed out from the kitchen. "Oh, you're back. Help set the table. Dinner's almost ready." Du Yan glared at Du Mu with frustration. "Mom, why did you invite him for dinner? We're not even that close." Du Mu smiled slyly. "Oh, someone's embarrassed. If I hadn't been bored and tidying up your room today, I wouldn't have known that Jichin was your boyfriend back in junior high. I always wondered why you were acting like such an idiot back then, smiling like a fool for no reason. Turns out you were having a puppy love." She pointed the spatula at Du Yan and sighed. "Now your little lover is back to rekindle your romance. You two are really lucky." It reminds me of my own first love." She then nostalgically reminisced about her beautiful first love. The entire dinner was tasteless, but Du Mu wouldn't stop probing into their past. Zhuo Jichen patiently answered every question. Why did you break up? Because my parents sent me abroad to study, and I didn't want to hold Yan Yan back with an uncertain future. She was in the second year of middle school at the time, and I was a year ahead. We met in the roller skating club. How far did it go? You'll have to ask Yan Yan about that. The more Du Yan listened, the more annoyed she became. She slammed down her chopsticks and said, I'm done eating. You two take your time. She slammed the door to her room, and through it, she could faintly hear Du Mu's laughter. She's shy. Du Yan remembered that summer when Zhuo Jichen went to America. It was hotter than any other summer in her life. She spent every day playing outside until she was as tanned as a piece of charcoal. At first, Zhuo Jichen didn't tell her that he was going to study in the US. They both loved Nanjing and had agreed to apply to Nanjing University together. Her grades weren't bad, but they weren't great either. She studied desperately to keep that promise. Then one day, Zhuo Jichen told her, full of guilt, that he couldn't take the exam with her at Nanjing University. His parents wanted him to study abroad, and they had already arranged everything. There were only 5 days left before his departure. He hadn't known how to break the news to her and had agonized over it for several days. She was stunned, her hands and feet quickly turning cold. But soon she smiled and said, foreign education is more advanced than ours. It's good for your future. Your parents are thinking very carefully. After a while, she asked him, so what about us? Are we breaking up? He looked at her with guilt and reluctance. He didn't know what to do either. Any promise made at that moment would have been empty. And so they broke up. On the day he left, she still went to the airport to see him off, smiling the entire time, comforting him so that he wouldn't feel guilty. She should have cried, clung to him, and begged him not to go, like in those idol dramas. In those shows, the male lead's heart always softens, and he ends up going home with the female lead. But she couldn't do that. She didn't shed a single tear. That summer, the scorching sun caused droughts in many places, and it dried up her heart too, leaving it barren. Du Mu didn't understand the complexities of her daughter's emotions. Ever since Zhuo Jichen had flattered her with, Auntie, your cooking is better than any 5-star restaurant, she frequently invited him over for meals. He was thick-skinned and never declined. Du Yan couldn't eat when he was around, and after half a month, she had lost a considerable amount of weight. She said to Zhuo Jichen, why do you keep coming over for dinner? People will think we're having an inappropriate relationship. Our relationship is already pretty inappropriate. Zhuo Jichen replied seriously. We're old flames, first loves, and we've even been on a matchmaking date. We might even get married in the future. In your dreams. I'm warning you. If you keep coming over for meals, I'll poison your food with pesticides. Zhuo Jichen put on a look of horror. Just as Du Yan was feeling triumphant, she saw him turn his head and shout toward the kitchen, Auntie, Yan Yan said I'm not allowed to come over for dinner anymore. Du Yan pounced on him to cover his mouth. He was leaning on the sofa, and when she jumped on him, he fell back onto it. She straddled him fiercely, grabbing his collar and threatening, You're asking for it. From now on, if you're at the dinner table, I won't be. She had just finished her harsh words when Du Mu came out of the kitchen after washing the dishes. She was shocked to see her daughter lying on top of Zhuo Jichen, looking as if she was about to force herself on him. Du Yan could tell from her mother's expression that she had misunderstood. Before she could explain, Du Mu covered her eyes with her fingers and mumbled to herself as she shuffled towards her bedroom, I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything. Zhuo Jichen laughed so hard, he almost fell over. A few days later, Zhuo Jichen sent a large bouquet of white roses to Du Yan's company through a florist. Su Meian couldn't hold back and rushed over to check the card attached to the flowers, exclaiming, Zhuo Jichen? Zhuo Jichen. Zhuo Jichen. She called out his name 3 times, each time more dramatic than the last. Do you know him? Du Yan casually brushed the roses and tossed them aside. Su Meian shrieked as if she had seen a ghost. Who doesn't know Zhuo Jichen? The youngest general manager in JK's history, featured in financial magazines. Wait, why would he send you flowers? You two shouldn't have any connection. Du Yan coughed lightly. He's the first love I told you about. Su Meion's mouth fell open, and after a while, she started squawking, "Girl, with such a handsome and wealthy first love right in front of you, who cares if he still has feelings for you or not? Go for it." Duyan scoffed and said, "Do I look like the kind of woman who goes after money?" Yes, Su Meion punctured her pretense without hesitation. Zhuo flower deliveries were frequent and intense. Before long, everyone in the company knew that JK's general manager was pursuing Duyan. Coincidentally, the company was negotiating a major deal with JK, one that had been under discussion for several months, without a conclusion. The higher-ups handed this enormous task to Du Yan and subtly hinted that she could use feminine wiles if necessary. Heaven knows she was just a lowly designer with no experience in business negotiations. She felt trapped but had to agree for the sake of her decent salary. Most people negotiating business deals at least have an assistant with them, but she was all alone, a single soldier entering the lion's den. Nowadays, business deals are often made over meals. She didn't know any negotiation tactics, so she just pulled out the contract and asked Zhuo to sign it. Zhuo glanced at the contract and tossed it aside, saying, "Let's eat first. We'll talk after dinner." She endured it for the sake of the contract. The meal lasted over 2 hours, and she drank quite a bit of alcohol. Tipsy, she still remembered to remind Zhuo to sign the contract. After paying the bill, Zhuo said, "Let's go see a movie." She was furious. "We're here to discuss business, not to go on a date." "It's the same thing." Zhuo eyes sparkled. He was a master at holding his liquor. The more he drank, the more alert he became. "I'll sign the contract after we watch the movie." He was acting like a spoiled child. The movie was First Love, starring Mario Maurer. Just looking at the poster was pleasing to the eye. Zhuo pointed at Mario and asked, "Is he more handsome, or am I?" Duyan snickered and ignored him. The plot of the movie was simple, but the attractive leads and the fresh style tugged at the heartstrings with its depiction of first love. Duyan was moved. She couldn't help but turn to look at Zhuo, only to find him looking at her too. In the dim light, their eyes met and sparks flew. Zhuo kept his word. After the movie, once they were in the car, he waved his hand and signed the contract. Duyan, holding the signed contract with a big smile, was about to get out of the car when Zhuo suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her back into the seat. "What are you doing?" Let go. You're being a rogue." Zhuo said, "It's just holding your hand. It's not like I haven't done it before." Duyan didn't want to bring up the past with him. She struggled a few times but couldn't break free, her eyebrows furrowed in anger. "If you don't let go, I'll bite you." Zhuo made a go-ahead gesture. Duyan was determined to teach him a lesson. She opened her mouth and bit down hard on his forearm. She bit for a long time, so long that she felt if she bit any harder, she might actually tear off that piece of flesh. But Zhuo didn't even flinch, still holding her hand firmly. "All right, what do you want?" Duyan was at her wit's end. He looked at her. "I just want to ask if there's still a chance for us." "No," Duyan blurted out without thinking. "Why not?" "I don't know yet. When I figure it out, I'll text you, okay?" "Duyan." Zhuo growled. "Be serious." He looked pained and helpless. After a while, he asked again, "Why didn't you ask me to stay back then? Why didn't you tell me not to go?" Duyan was stunned for a moment before realizing what he was referring to. She said, "Oh, did you think you were in a drama? Were you expecting me to cry and beg you to stay, so you could feel all proud and accomplished? And besides, you had everything arranged already. If I had asked you to stay, would you have stayed?" "Zhuo, I never saw you as the sentimental type." "Hey, it's been so many years. What's the point of asking this now?" Duyan's chest heaved slightly as she spoke a string of words. Zhuo softly said, "You still resent me after all." Duyan smiled. "I don't resent you. I just feel a sense of coldness. Back then, we were young, and we thought that loving each other meant we could grow old together. But in the end, we couldn't withstand the world's temptations. It was so fragile. You left just like that, and there was nothing anyone could do. It turns out that nothing lasts forever. Zhujichen slowly let go of her hand. Duyan closed her eyes. Zhujichen, I really never resented you. If I were in your position, I would have chosen to go abroad too. No, that wasn't a choice. We didn't have a choice at all back then. The next day, the contract was handed to the big boss. Delighted, the boss promoted Du Yan to design director. The original design director had resigned 2 months ago, and the position had been vacant ever since. Among the colleagues, Du Yan wasn't considered a strong candidate for the role, so her promotion made her a target of envy. Many, unhappy with the decision, whispered that she must have used backdoor connections. Du Yan laughed it off, thinking she really had used a backdoor. Without Zhujichen, she wouldn't have been promoted. For a while, Zhujichen hadn't come over to her house for dinner. Du Yan's mother asked, "Is Jichen very busy with work? Every time I invite him for dinner, he says he doesn't have time." Du Yan was enjoying her sweet and sour ribs, replying with her mouth full. He probably realized it's not appropriate for him to keep coming over since we're not really related. Her mother wasn't pleased. "What do you mean you're not related? Weren't you two close before? You even went on a blind date. How did it suddenly turn into nothing?" Du Yan took another bite of ribs. "We seriously tried dating for a while, but we realized the passion from our youth had faded. We decided to go back to being friends, so please stop inviting him over for dinner. It's quite awkward for him." Her mother sighed. "What a pity. Where am I going to find such a perfect son-in-law again?" She continued eating her meal with a sad expression. Du Yan felt guilty for getting her mother's hopes up for nothing and volunteered to do the dishes after dinner. As she was washing the dishes, her mother peeked in and said, "Yan Yan, I contacted Annie Shen, and she knows of a nice young man. This Saturday, you should go meet him." Du Yan's hand slipped, nearly dropping a plate. "Mom, your speed is truly impressive." She didn't plan to take the blind date seriously, but she agreed to go just to appease her mother. They arranged to meet at the Royal Hotel at 10 a.m. She also planned to have lunch with Su Meian at 11 a.m. This time, her mother and Auntie Shin didn't accompany her. The young man she met was quite handsome and good at making conversation. After only a few words from Du Yan, he had already told her his entire life story. At the end, he added, "I'll let you in on a little secret. I think I like you." "Thanks." Encouraged, the young man pushed further. "So, how do you feel about me?" Du Yan took a sip of coffee, thinking of a way to respond tactfully without hurting his feelings. Before she could speak, she saw a tall figure in a sharp suit approaching. "Zhujichen, what are you doing here?" "On a blind date." "Miss Du, who is this?" the young man asked. Zhujichen smiled at him warmly. "Hello, I'm Du Yan's husband." The young man's jaw dropped in shock. Zhujichen continued, still smiling, "But we're getting divorced soon." He then turned to Du Yan. "You're in the wrong here. Going on a blind date before we're even divorced, isn't that wasting his time?" Du Yan played along. "I just wanted to be prepared. That way, when the divorce and the new marriage happen at the same time, I won't have to make 2 trips to the Civil Affairs Bureau." Miss Du, I just remembered something urgent. I have to go." The young man quickly fled. Zhujichen sat down across from her and said, "He's not good enough for you." Du Yan snorted. "Thanks for the compliment." She then asked, "Why did you ruin my chances?" Zhujichen raised an eyebrow. "How could that be called ruining it? I was rescuing you from a disaster. Look at the expression on your face, like you were going to your death. I could tell right away your mom forced you to come. Besides, we're still together. Why are you going on blind dates? Who's together with you? I told you there's no chance for us. And you haven't been coming over to my house for dinner these past few days. I've really been busy, working overtime every day." Du Yan checked her phone. "Do you have anything else to say? If not, I'm leaving. I've got a lunch date with a friend." "No, nothing else. I just wanted to let you know. I want to get back together." When Zhujichen said, "I want to get back together," it wasn't a plea or a negotiation, it was a declaration. Just like an emperor issuing an imperial decree in ancient times, by the will of heaven and the emperor's order, Zhujichen will reunite with Du Yan. Over a decade ago, he had forcefully pulled himself out of her life, and now, More than 10 years later, he was forcefully inserting himself back in. Besides sending flowers and gifts, inviting her for coffee, frequently coming over for meals, he even openly announced that they were a couple. He would wait for her after work in his car outside her office, no matter the time. He had firmly attached himself to her. Diane said, "Zhujichen, could you stop being so shameless? How many men who wanted to pursue me have you scared off? Those men are not worthy of you. I'm the one who's truly meant for you." Diane sneered. "Zhujichen, did you study shamelessness as a major in America? Can you stop being so selfish? I just want to marry an ordinary man. Are you deliberately trying to ruin my happiness?" Zhujichen replied, "No one but me can give you happiness. Honestly, did you actually major in shamelessness in the US?" Zhujichen responded softly, "Diane, call me shameless or thick-skinned if you want, but I'm stuck on you, and I'm not leaving again. When I was in America, I made up my mind. The moment I returned, I was going to win you back. If you had a boyfriend, I would have taken you back. If you were married, I would have ruined your marriage and found a way to make you divorce." He paused, then added with deep emotion, "I'm selfishly in love with you." Diane was so shocked by his heartfelt confession that she splashed the bottle of mineral water she was holding in his face. A few days later, Zhujichen caught a cold and blamed it on Diane, feigning pitifully over the phone, "If you don't come see me, I'm going to burn myself to death." Diane said, "I really want to come, but this Sunday our big boss is having a party on his yacht, and he invited me. I'm busy shopping for something to wear. Sorry about that. But don't worry. If you do burn to death, I'll definitely come to pay my respects." After hanging up the phone, Sumayon clicked her tongue. What a waste. The two of them wandered around the mall. Diane bought a long slip dress, while Sumayon opted for a sexy bikini. On Sunday, when they boarded the yacht, Diane realized that she and Sumayon were the only company employees there. The others were either the big boss's business partners or his close friends. The female companions they brought were all well-known, and Diane recognized several of them from TV. Diane felt out of place. "Why do I feel like we don't belong here? What do you think the boss invited us for, just to add a touch of color?" Sumayon looked in a certain direction and said, "He probably invited you to keep someone company, someone who didn't burn to death. As for me, I'm definitely here just for decoration." Following her gaze, Diane saw Zhujichen, dressed in a white shirt with the buttons open down to his chest, revealing his solid build, strolling toward her. After a moment's thought, Diane realized she was only on the boss's fancy yacht thanks to Zhujichen. "Weren't you down with a cold? Why aren't you at home resting? What are you doing out here in the sea breeze? Aren't you afraid of burning to death?" Zhuijichen's face lit up with delight. That sounded like a disguised way of showing concern. "You're overthinking it," Diane said. "I was cursing you in a twisted way." The party was nothing more than drinking, dancing, and flirting. While Zhujichen was surrounded by a group of beauties, Diane sneaked away to the deck to sunbathe. Sumayon had disappeared somewhere, leaving Diane with no one to talk to. "Are you Diane?" a voice said from behind her. She turned around to see a woman dressed provocatively, and quite beautiful at that. Diane recognized her as a model who had recently become popular, surname Zhou. "My name is Diane, but I'm not sure if I'm the one you're talking about." Miss Zhou looked her up and down with disdain and said, "No chest, no curves, and not particularly pretty either. I don't know what Jichen sees in you." She seemed genuinely puzzled. Diane smirked with satisfaction and said, "You have the chest, the curves, and you're pretty, but Jichen just doesn't like you." She looked like she was reveling in her victory. Miss Zhou scoffed, "Don't get too smug. I'll steal him back sooner or later." "And how are you planning to do that?" "By stripping naked." "What did you say?" Miss Zhou flared up and, with a loud slap, struck Diane across the face. Diane was furious. "How dare you hit me?" She was never one to back down, and she raised her hand to strike back. Miss Zhou wasn't about to take it lying down either. In their scuffle, Diane accidentally got pushed overboard into the sea. Aren't models supposed to be skinny? Where did Miss Zhou get such strength? Diane was pondering this as she fell into the water. She could swim, but She decided to give this arrogant Miss Zhou a scare by pretending to drown. She flailed her arms a bit and slowly sank beneath the water. As expected, Miss Zhou was terrified. Her face turned pale and her voice quivered. "Help, help." Duyan fell overboard. "Help." Then, with a splash, Duyan heard someone else dive off the yacht. But that person soon started sinking too. It was Zhujichen, and he couldn't swim. Duyan swam over to him and lifted him to the surface. He was heavy, and she could barely keep him afloat. They bobbed up and down, swallowing mouthfuls of seawater. Everyone on the yacht had rushed to the railings, apparently thinking Zhujichen was heroically saving a damsel in distress. They just watched the scene unfold. Finally, someone noticed something was off and shouted, "Hey, it looks like Jichin can't swim." Only then did 3 more people jump into the water. 2 of them lifted Zhujichen from either side and hauled him onto the yacht, while the 3rd helped Duyan. When Duyan climbed back on board, she saw Zhujichen lying motionless on the deck, with the big boss performing CPR on him. Seeing her approach, the boss said, "You do the mouth-to-mouth. I just can't bring myself to do it." There was no time to hesitate. Without thinking, she administered a textbook-perfect round of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Zhujichen coughed a few times, turned his head, and spat out a lot of water. Exhausted, Duyan collapsed on the deck. Zhujichen propped himself up and asked, "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Duyan scolded him, "Are you out of your mind? You can't swim, yet you still jumped into the sea. Didn't you know I could swim?" He smiled weakly. "I didn't have time to think. My body just acted on its own. All I knew was, if something happened to you, I couldn't live with myself." Someone nearby teased, "Oh, looks like our general manager Zhua is quite the romantic." Zhujichen asked, "Why are you crying?" Dian wiped her eyes. "I'm not crying, it's just seawater." Zhujichen smiled, but then suddenly collapsed with a thud. Duyan panicked and rushed over to slap his face. Sumayon felt his forehead and said, "Don't worry, Dian. He's burning up with a fever. He needs to get to a hospital immediately." The big boss personally drove them to the hospital. On the way, Zhujichen woke up once more, grabbed Duyan's hand, and mumbled, "I promised I wouldn't leave you again. Believe me, I'm no longer the helpless boy I used to be. I have the ability now, and I can stay by your side. No matter where, up in the heavens or down in the underworld, I won't leave you." Duyan held back her tears and said, "Zhujichen, you must be faking it. How can you still say such a long sentence with such a high fever?" Zhujichen tried to smile but was too weak. Seizing the moment before he lost consciousness, he managed to say 2 words, "Get back together." "Okay," Duyan said, wiping her tears. She wasn't sure if he heard her. "Duyan, you've kept this photo album all this time. Be honest, were you waiting for me?" Duyan rolled her eyes dramatically. "Do you think I'm that bored? Let me tell you, a woman like me, blessed with both beauty and brains, changes boyfriends every month, The rest of her words were swallowed by Zhuijichen's kiss. He gently bit her lips and tongue, their kiss deepening with every moment. Duyan stood on her tiptoes, kissing him back passionately. "I wasn't waiting for you. I just haven't found anyone else who moves my heart like you do."